Help me welcome Butzel with their breakout session, State-of-the-Art Trade Secret Protection.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to stand for 1 minute, and then we're going to sit down and do this informally. First, I want to thank Dan and Automation Alley for making this opportunity available to us to talk to you about trade secret protection. I want to introduce a couple of our other speakers. First, I'm Kerry DeWitt from Butzel Long. I'm a trade secret lawyer, as is Sarah Nierenberg. So this is our specialty. This is what we do. But we are also privileged to have with us Doug Copley, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for Auxium. Auxium provides organizations with IT and security managed services. And I think what that means will become more apparent with some of Doug's remarks. Now let's talk a little bit for a second about what we're going to accomplish in this session if we're successful. We're going to talk to you about the current dangers of trade secret loss and theft across business sectors. In other words, why should you be worried about this? We're going to talk to you a little bit about the legal definition of trade secrets, which a gentleman named Mike is going to be especially interested in. I talked with him a little bit before. We're going to talk to you about best practices to prevent theft of trade secrets and what you want to be thinking about so that you can be prepared for litigation and how to go about litigation if it's necessary to protect your trade secrets. And finally, a topic that's clearly not going to go away. What are the implications, think about this for a second, of remote work when it comes to trade secret protection? Now, let's tee it off with a question for Sarah. Sarah, what do you think the greater threat is? An external hacker or a departing employee when we're talking about dangers to your trade secrets?
I guess maybe we should throw this one to the audience first by raising your hand. Raise your hand if you think it's an external hacker. And everybody else says it's the departing employee. Well, everybody would be correct then. So if we go to the next slide, we can see how bad it really is. A survey published in late 2015 found that 87% of employees who leave a job take with them data that they created in the job, and 28% take data that others had created, probably mostly the company. And the majority who took company data with them, 88% took corporate presentations and strategy documents, 31% took customer lists, and 25% took intellectual property. So the question we get a lot, is it really that bad? And it really is that bad. In a survey of 1,000 employees in the United States and Europe, 1 in 5 employees said that they uploaded sensitive and confidential corporate data to an external cloud service specifically for the purpose of sharing it with others. So not accidentally, and not just so that they could have it in their back pocket, but because they were going to use it.
Sarah, what makes it more likely nowadays, if there is a change, that employees feel the temptation, the urge to take trade secrets with them?
I've seen some reports that say a lot of employees feel that it's their data, especially if they were the ones that were the ones helping or primarily creating it. I think it's also happening a lot more when people are, you hear the Great Resignation, so there's just a lot more departing employees, and they feel like it's not really confidential, that this is just common knowledge that they can use in whatever job that they go to next, even if it's a competitor.
Mobility.
Yes.
Doug, is there anything about the way that data is collected, carried, movable, that makes it a bigger problem nowadays?
Yeah, the format of the data and where it is makes all the difference in the world. There are protections to protect it wherever it may be, but you have to know that, and you have to specifically define your controls in such a way to capture the practice that you think is in place.
So why is this so significant? Because like this slide says, and you all know coming in here, this is your secret sauce. This is the most important information in your company. This is what makes your company your company. And so we have to think outside the box too about what trade secrets are. And I think that gets into the litigation part too. So Carrie's going to go through the legal requirements to qualify for a trade secret.
Now, I hope this will be a little bit eye-opening and that this definition will not seem so opaque to you that it can't accommodate lots of different kinds of data. This is a broader definition that comes from the Uniform Trade Secrets Act, which is in place now in 49 of the 50 states and was the model for the European Union's new trade secret protection. So a lot of what we used to call the Western world is governed by this definition. And I don't want you to think that because it's a little bit dense, that this definition wouldn't accommodate both technical data, if it satisfies these requirements, and softer data, such as marketing data. Now, there are really only two pieces to the definition. It has to derive independent economic value. You have to be able to make some money with it if you're an organization, drive some profits, accomplish your business purposes with it. And it has to be, that has to be because it's not known to everybody. If anybody has the secret, it's not a trade secret. But the second part of the definition is the one that people forget about it. And they forget about it all the time. And that is that it has to be subject to efforts, actual efforts, that are reasonable under the circumstances to keep the data secret. Now, we're going to talk about some of the ways that you would do that. But I'm surprised at how often people concentrate on the first half of the definition. This is our secret sauce. This is what makes our business go. This is what we do better than anybody else. But they don't realize that they're putting the data in peril because they are not taking reasonable efforts in the circumstances to keep the data safe and protected from other people.
So I'll go through some of the non-technical methods that are available to prevent trade secrets, and Doug is going to talk about the technical parts of it. So some of this you may already know, but it's worth going over again. The first and foremost is this kind of need to know. If you have lower level employees, they don't need to have access to everything, specifically things that they don't need to do their job. And so Doug can go through some of the ways, the technical ways that your company can just, by software purposes, just limit their access. The other thing that goes hand in hand with that is owning the equipment. So the laptops that you give them, the phones that you give them, that's going to give you more options of, managing the devices themselves and having the ability to wipe the devices if something happens. Now, when you're wiping something, we ask, and we counsel people to exercise caution with that, because if an employee has, or a former employee has something still in their possession, like their laptop, and you think that they were using it improperly, then you might need that laptop, and if you wipe it, you may be destroying evidence that you may need later in litigation. So there's a balancing act that has to be done there, but Doug can help us, work through that as well. Visitor restrictions is more helpful for outside, but it's still something to keep in mind.
If you go into a facility and it's a technical facility and there's nobody that makes you sign a visitor log and gives you a badge that you're a visitor, don't you wonder nowadays about their protection of their data and their company? Isn't that becoming much more common? Our auto supplier clients, every single one of them have this as a part of their business. In the old days, you'd see people that were able to walk into a facility, and there's some very famous cases about this, and they were able to look around unimpeded. And nowadays, that's just part of what's considered modern trade secret protection. For example, in lawsuits that we are prosecuting where trade secret theft has occurred, one of the things that we identify as a fact that supports the fact that these are actually secrets that meet the definition of the Uniform Trade Secrets Act are, do we have visitor restrictions and so forth. So it seems very basic, but there are about 10 or 12 things that you can do that are like that.
Yeah, I mean, we really, in a lawsuit, we're basically listing out all of the ways that we protect this data. Visitor restrictions, need to know, passwords. I mean, something as simple as, you know, in your laptop, does your computer go to a password protected screen after 15 minutes of non-use or something like that? I mean, we're listing these things to show the court that we treat this like it's confidential. We don't just put it out into the open. A big one that's on this slide is confidentiality provisions, whether they're in the employee contracts, whether they're in handbooks. You have your non-compete agreements, the non-solicitation agreements, and for the non-solicitation, that goes for both, you know, you can't solicit other employees as well as customers. And then you have to frequently remind and train employees of those restrictions. You can't just plop it in a handbook or a contract when they start and just forget about it and assume they're gonna remember it. You kind of have to beat them over the head with it, and it really kind of makes them remember the fact that this stuff that they're working on isn't theirs, it's the company's data. Even if they, you know, took a large part in making that data.
You thought non-competes were not enforceable in Michigan. That is definitely the street law view of non-competes, and it has a hold of the public's imagination, this belief, to the point where it's fascinating to me, where people say, and how many times have you heard this? A person has a right to work, or a non-compete is un-American. Well, when you consider that a non-compete is designed to protect reasonable business purposes, such as trade secrets, not limited to them, it could protect customer relationships. If that's its intention and there's data to support that the non-compete or the non-solicit, the employee non-solicit or the customer non-solicit, have the purpose of protecting such items, they are entirely enforceable. After 1986, the advent of the Michigan Antitrust Reform Act, non-competes became completely legal in Michigan if they have a legitimate business purpose. So in analyzing the question about whether your business is one that needs non-competes, the question you should be asking is, what if this employee left and went to a competitor? What kinds of dangers are presented with the know-how that they have about our secret sauce? How forward-facing is this executive, this employee, in terms of customer relationships, such that it would be a danger for this person to go to your competitor? Sarah's point about economic mobility is a major issue, and it's the biggest reason why most states allow enforcement of non-competes. California, very famously, does not allow it, but most states do. I think, I'll give you a little factoid, by the way. Guess what the #1 example of trade secrets that were thought to be protected when the Michigan legislature enacted the non-compete statute in the state of Michigan? Guess what was thought to be the example they had in mind when they said we really need to make non-compete agreements legal? Anybody guess? I'm sorry? 1986. Now that's a good example around here. Customer lists. Something that people don't think of as a trade secret sometimes, but a modern customer list can satisfy both of those requirements of the Trade Secret Act, that is valuable because it's not generally known and subject to the efforts to make it secret and so forth, and can very much be a trade secret. Sarah, are we finished with this slide?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I guess I want to reiterate what Carrie said a little bit with a caveat, though. I mean, it really depends on your business and what you're protecting, because we're on the other side of this too, and we've seen some pretty bad unenforceable agreements where they're not protecting anything. They're just trying to restrict trade and competition, and those aren't going to be enforceable, or they shouldn't be for most courts. So it's really not a one-size-fits-all. It's really, you really need to talk it through with an attorney or an expert in the area to make sure that it's reasonable for your business.
Sarah, what's an example of a famous case that in our world where a non-compete was thought to be ridiculous?
I mean, I had one now where I was on the other side, and it actually wasn't a non-compete, it was a non-solicitation, and it's in perpetuity for any customer that was once a customer, even if it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and you can't solicit employees who are employees of this mortgage company 20 years ago for any purpose, even if you convince them to switch careers and go become a financial advisor. I mean, it's so far out of bounds that a court isn't even going to rewrite that. And there was nothing that they were protecting either. Everything was public information. So it's just a clear, obvious example of something that was just, a company was trying to prevent employees from going someplace else, probably to competitors.
Why is an exit interview so important when an employee leaves the business, Sarah?
Besides maybe wanting to know why they're leaving and what you could do better, which is, we're not going to downplay that. It's really to, again, take the opportunity to beat them over the head with their obligations. You can even go as far, and we would recommend requiring the employee sign a document stating that he or she has returned all company data and that he or she has not retained a copy of that data. If you have that and we find out later that they have something, we're going to be attaching that as an exhibit to probably the complaint.
Now, we're going to give you some technical things, but the gentleman who's going to do it, I'll bet you anything, is going to do it in plain English. Let's find out. I think he has a gift in doing this, Doug. What technical tools are available separate from the practical business restrictions that Sarah was describing that would help someone to prevent, detect, et cetera, trade secret thefts?
Well, let's start out by, let's go back to the prior slide a second, Carrie.
Yes.
And that first bullet point on the page, policies to monitor and audit employee behavior, right? When it comes down to, technical controls that we'll put in an environment, that is what we're doing, right? So we rely on that policy being in place that says we can pretty much, monitor and audit anything that's done on any corporate asset.
So they have fair warning.
Absolutely. So with that, I want to talk about 3 different types of controls. So on the first page here, I talk about preventative controls. So these are controls you're going to put in your environment to prevent something from happening in the first place. These are usually the best controls that you would put in place for your organization because it prevents issues. But that being said, preventative ones tend to be the more difficult to implement, the more expensive to implement. So, the very first thing there is not a light task at all, and that's classifying your trade secret data with electronic tagging. I can tell you in my experience, I do not see this deployed a lot, and it's because it tends to be more difficult. and time-consuming and costly. But something that's very important to do, especially if you want to put rules and controls in place to prevent, the transfer and movement and access to that information. So running down the list, I know there's a lot on this slide, so I don't want to hit on all these, but some of the key ones in today's environment, users should not have administrative access on their PC. And I tell you this not because we don't trust the user per se. That's not the reason we restrict access. The reason we restrict access is because if you're on your computer and you contract a piece of malware, right, one way or another, and it gets in way too easy these days, the malware is going to inherit the rights of the person using the computer at the time. And so we do not want the user to have administrative privileges on that laptop or computer, because if they get malware, that malware is going to have administrative rights. So they can pretty much do anything at that point. As Sarah mentioned before, applying least privilege concept to any systems and data. Don't give people access to all kinds of things they don't need. Some of the other key ones in here, multi-factor authentication, I can't emphasize enough. With the technology today, this is a fairly easy control to implement, and it provides so much better security protection.
Doug, is that when I get a ping on my cell phone separate, and it wants me to acknowledge that I'm trying to log in to something?
Yep. It comes in the form of, maybe a pop-up on your phone that you have to acknowledge, or an SMS text message that you get on your phone. Could be a phone call. But those provide so much better protection. I encourage that for any application in your environment, whether it's internal or external. Some of the other things you do from a preventative standpoint, preventing impossible travel, right? So Office 365 is probably a great example of this, in that you can set a policy that says, hey, if Doug logs in from Detroit and then 30 minutes from now he tries to log in from Los Angeles, block it, because there's no physical way he can do that. And so there are easy alerts like that you can set up. The only other one I want to focus on here is removable media. Just don't allow it at all. No USB cards, no memory sticks. I mean, in today's technology, there's no reason for it anyway, because it's very easy to move stuff around without plugging something in. And that's just one more avenue of attack. So those were preventative controls. What I want to mention now are detective controls. So these are controls that don't necessarily prevent something from happening, but when something does happen, it'll detect the fact that it happened so that you can respond to it. And so the most common things, especially around trade secret protection, are detecting anomalous user activity. So technology in the last 5 years has gone a long way in this area of detecting what's normal behavior for a user on their computer and picking up on things that are not. So, if a 10-year employee has never accessed a financial system and all of a sudden they start trying to access it, that's anomalous activity, and that should be triggering an alert to somebody, right? Or if they normally in the course of their business, maybe they download or use, 15 or 20 files throughout the course of the day. And this is particularly important in healthcare, which I have a lot of background in. On a particular day, a clinician or nurse all of a sudden is accessing 500 people's, records instead of 25. Big red flag. And so we should be detecting that and following up.
Doug, do people object to monitoring systems that would find them doing things like this, in your experience?
Well, sure they do, especially if it's on their personal device. Because we do have ways that we can monitor activity on personal devices, and people generally don't like that. But it's all in the same context here of trying to protect the organization and the organization's trade secret data. So some of these other things are just other things you can trigger on. Alert when there's an unusual amount of file downloads. You can also alert on uploads, right? I don't encourage necessarily letting people go out to Google accounts or Yahoo accounts, things that they can upload, or any kind of public data storing site, unless it's advocated by the company. Is that something that we want to use? You know, there is some technology out there, and I'll talk about this on a later slide, that is hugely helpful from a security and incident response perspective. And it's, think of it like your TiVo or your DVR at home that's constantly recording the TV so that you can stop, right, and then just resume where you left off. They have similar technology available on the computers. And the reason this is so helpful to the security organization is we can tell if there's intent or not. So if an event triggers, we can go back and actually play that back and see, was the user actually doing something malicious? Or did they contract a piece of malware and it was happening unbeknownst to the user at the time? So they were doing nothing, you know, on their screen that was an anomaly.
How about corrective controls?
So corrective are the ones that will automatically take action for you as an IT or security organization. So we detect something happens, we're gonna, you know, the software is gonna immediately jump in and take action. This is ideally, you know, if you can't put a preventative control in place to stop something from happening, these kind of controls are really important. So some of them, in today's terminology, think about, you know, what you hear in the industry. They tout the next gen anti-malware, the CrowdStrikes, the Sentinel-1s, which will not only detect something happening, but it'll stop it, right at the time that it sees it happen. And so these are far better, you know, than your traditional tools in terms of their ability to take action themselves without somebody waiting to look at an issue and then deciding what to do about it.
Now, what kind of goodies are there out there to accomplish these purposes, Doug?
So the one software that I just mentioned that's more like a DVR, there's several companies out there that make that kind of software. Those are, the ones I mentioned there, ForcePoint and Observe IT or Observe It by Proofpoint are a couple of those examples that function as that recorder. The general category of tools around this technology is what we refer to as data loss prevention tools. And so those are tools that will either detect, you know, movement off of a device, you know, whether it's external media, whether it's upload to another site. It can detect it, you know, transferring across your network. And, you know, certainly through email. So a lot of the email tools that are out there today have this built in now. So in Office 365, I can set up rules, you know, to look to see if people are transmitting sensitive information and be alerted on that or prevent it. The one at the top of that page is the most granular.
I got it.
If you go back.
I got it.
That's digital rights management. So think about this as technology that you're applying to the document itself. So let's say you have a sensitive PDF file. You can apply controls directly to that file, which will be enforced whether that document is on your computer or on your network or completely not on your network or computers. So you can send those protected documents to people and it will verify them, and you know, when it decides whether or not they're going to be allowed to open it or print it or anything else, or even the duration of time in which they're allowed to access it.
Doug, does the cloud make it harder to protect trade secrets?
So this is really organization dependent. And it really depends on how mature an organization's controls are. So what I find personally in my experiences is that it tends to be easier to deploy these controls in cloud systems, but not for the reason that you may think. It's not that the cloud technology is necessarily any better. It's because if you're going to take sensitive company information and you're going to put it in a cloud platform, that process of going through that forces the conversations that you need to have around who's allowed to access this, under what circumstances, what ways are we going to let people access this. And traditionally, people look at things on your internal systems and just say, well, if it's on an internal system, I trust it. So if a computer's on our network, we're going to trust it. If somebody's logged in, I'm going to trust them. And so those conversations don't typically, or haven't traditionally happened. And so moving to the cloud forces the needed conversations.
And the difference between online and offline protection, you might want to have those questions ready. You're going to be asking them shortly. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so COVID really drove this home. A lot of companies were forced to all of a sudden push a lot of people remote, and organizations needed to protect their information with people not being in the network. So if you had controls around your network, you could no longer rely on them because people sat outside of the network. And this really forced, from a technology perspective, pushing those comprehensive controls out to the computer. So if you were to compare, the technology at a corporate PC today compared to what it was 3 years ago, there's much more technology at that endpoint computer today. And it's because we have to be able to protect stuff when it's not on the network.
All right, before we go to some examples and your questions, let's assume that you've done the items necessary to have technical controls in place and practical controls, exit interviews, proper contracts, and policies. The last thing to think about before, hopefully, you're in a successful lawsuit, if you need to protect your data with a lawsuit, is have you acted consistently to protect your data? If you play favorites when people leave and excuse compliance with the non-compete for certain people, or if you don't chase the loss of trade secrets because, that person would never mess with our data, you're going to have problems in demonstrating that the second part of the definition of a trade secret was satisfied. Did you take reasonable measures to protect the data? If you're going to have a lawsuit, act swiftly. Don't fool around with it. It's not going to get better with age. As soon as you know your data is compromised, deal with it right away. Get experts like Doug and others involved who can help you trace what the computer will show you has been done with your data, and seek injunctive relief quickly. A lot of times an injunction, you can't work there or you can't work there in that job, is going to be what the whole lawsuit is about. Damages might be more difficult to prove. Preserve your data. Don't put yourself in a position where you can't prove what happened to you. Do you notice the real-time data tracking that Doug described? A great way to preserve your data. Now, we're going to give you an example, and you are going to get to participate. We're talking about an employee named Mary. She's a controller, high-level executive. She's been working remotely, like everybody's going to be apparently from now on. She logs into her company's network via VPN, and she's able to complete all of her work with one exception. She's got this doggone printer that she can't scan or print from directly from her company VPN connection. She emails sensitive financial data to her personal email account so she can print it. Does anybody see a problem? You're nodding, sir. What's the problem?
Her personal email is not secured at all, so it's now an archive of all that sensitive information.
Do you think any of Doug's protections are in her personal email? Doug, what do we do about this kind of problem?
So the best thing we can do is put controls in to prevent it from happening in the first place. So, you know, there are things we can do to allow people to print, and that's probably the best step in this particular situation, but we can absolutely, from a technology perspective, prevent Mary from sending this to her personal email.
And you have to make some judgments about that, and then you have to train about the judgments that you've made. Now, I've got some more goody slides for you, but I'd rather hear from you at this stage. So if we want more slides, you can put on your thinking caps and we can use those. But some questions, please. What about your situation? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Question for Butzel Long. In investor meetings, our presenters often put some kind of a confidential notification on their presentation. They haven't asked for us to sign an NDA, and we wouldn't sign one anyway. Is that worth the pixels or the paper that it's printed on to just call something confidential without
Yes, it is.
An NDA?
It is definitely worth doing. You have another question inside your question, though. Let's assume that you have labeled some data that you're providing to people for a fee confidential. Is it sufficient to protect the data if it's really a trade secret? Probably not. Their purpose may be to say they don't want the range of people exposed to the data to be beyond those who've received permission, perhaps paid a fee for it. But that's exactly right. If I were defending a trade secret suit, did everybody hear that? They shouldn't be doing that anyway with their trade secrets. I would be all over that situation. So all you had to do was pay $50 and you could look at your $1 million, $10 million, $1 billion trade secrets. Please. Great question. We need another one. Do you want another slide? Let's hear it.
Anybody else before I take doubles, you know? All right. Same situation. They do have an NDA. What's the difference between any information under an NDA and a trade secret? If there's an NDA, is it a trade secret and vice versa?
Okay, very good question. There is such a thing as confidential data and data that is subject to an NDA that falls short of being a trade secret. There are many cases out there. Personally, I think the number of cases where you have this happen is relatively small. But there are certain situations where you have data and the argument is that there's not any independent value, or you haven't taken quite sufficient steps to render it a trade secret given the incredible size of your organization. Courts apply a sliding scale. They say the bigger you are, the more efforts you should make. You can protect that data with the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement, by contract. And you know something? Every single one of these suits that we prosecute has both the trade secret element and the breach of contract element involving the non-disclosure agreement. Do we have another question, or should we tee up another slide? Yes, sir.
So when I look back at your definition of a trade secret slide, I see there's some overlap for when someone might file for a patent for something. There's talks about process, formulas, things like that.
Yes.
So my general question is, when would you, what's the thought process and trade-offs of keeping something a trade secret versus filing for patent protection?
Okay, that is an excellent question. It's a tactical question that needs to be made by the organization, trade secret versus patent. I'll give you an example first, and then I'll tell you what the patent lawyers and the trade secret lawyers, who are only distantly related, by the way, have to say about that, okay? An example of one where there's no tension at all between the two methods of protecting your intellectual property is you don't have a patent yet, but you're going to. You need to have trade secret protections in place for that so that your data and the ultimate patent are not compromised. Now, what patent people say is they would rather have a patent in situations, first of all, if you're walking down the street, the dentist is going to look at your teeth, they're always going to say, we should have a patent. But if you're going to have a situation where you really do have a unique patentable idea that you want to make impervious for 20 years to any attacks, including trade secret theft, then a patent is a better modality in order to accomplish that. That's the example that I hear the most. Another question?
One more question, if anyone has one.
I'll tell you what, we'll give you another goodie here, and I bet we can do it in a few minutes here. No, we went too far there. We went too far. All right, let's do this one. Remote workforce challenges. Okay, everybody's working remote. Zachary's an engineer for the family firm. He's been working remotely. He comes to the office when needed, but he doesn't have a good Wi-Fi signal at home. So he goes to the public Wi-Fi at the local coffee shop. Sarah and then Doug, what do you see here?
I would think that the first thing that jumps out to me, and it's something that I would do if this were me, is I'd jump on the VPN. If I had to use a public Wi-Fi, I jump on the VPN. The VPN, I think, would give me protection for all my legal documents. Nobody could get in. We'll see if Doug can confirm this. I also usually try to use my hotspot, but that doesn't always work so effectively. But from an employment perspective, what do you want to be telling your employers or your employees in a handbook and in training? You want to tell them, if you are in this situation, go on your VPN. VPN will provide you the security. Let's see if I got that right.
Yeah, so, I've ran across this with companies, and, my answer is, if you don't have a strong enough Wi-Fi signal to be working remotely, then don't, right? Then come into the office. But, if Sarah had a great idea, right, in that she uses her mobile hotspot. I will tell you the security on a mobile hotspot is better than a public Wi-Fi, right? So using, Verizon's, T-Mobile's, whatever systems are inherently more secure than a public Wi-Fi. Now that being said, Sarah's other intuition around VPN is correct as well. So when you're sitting in a coffee shop, at the point that you're connecting to your company VPN, right, that traffic can be eavesdropped, right, by somebody else. And first of all, you need to make sure you're using the legitimate Wi-Fi, because it's easy to impersonate the real Wi-Fi at a coffee shop. But once you establish the VPN with your company, at that point, the traffic is encrypted from your laptop to your company, so you do have a secure channel at that point.
All right, so what do you see tying it all together? Number one, decide what your organization needs using the criteria we've set out, the concerns, the ideas that we've set out here to protect your data. And then train your people on that, the approach that you're going to use to protect your data. Almost every organization could do better in this area. Hopefully what we've done here today is give you some ideas on how, with practical policy and contract changes and technical changes, you can control and in many cases prevent the loss of your trade secret data.
And
Thanks so much. Go ahead, Doug.
I'll make a point. I've written a lot of acceptable use policies in my time, and I would argue that's from an information security and data privacy perspective, it's probably the most important policy to have.
Very good. Thank you for participating, and thanks for all of your questions.
Excellent presentation. Thank you, Butzel, for your great insights and bite-sized chunks and great information. I love the case study, the case studies here, the opportunities for violations. So nicely presented. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Test, 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 test.
Test, test. Sound okay? Yeah.
Is that better? Is it working? Can you hear me? All right.
Test, test. We good?
All right, we don't have a full house, so if you want to, you can concentrate in the center if you like. Bring it up front. We're all comfortable here with intimacy. All right, well, welcome to Automation Alley's annual Integrate Conference and the breakout session, which is titled The Future of Work. Put this on your calendars, by the way, for next year. You don't want to miss this. By the way, there's close to 1,300 members here today, 1,300 participants. So we've got a large cadre of representatives from a technology standpoint. Feel free to browse the booths out there. I see some familiar faces in here, so thank you for joining us and this important discussion around the future of work. Thank you for joining, and Clayton and McCurvey is the sponsor for this event, and we'll get right to it since we only have 45 minutes. I'm pleased to introduce Clayton and McCurvey's representative, Tim Finnerty.
Thanks.
All right. I'm going to jump down and bring the mic with me. So
All right.
And by the way, is there a Q&A session afterwards?
Well,
Okay.
yeah, there's going to be,
Okay.
We're going to moderate this panel. I have some questions. I'll introduce the panelists here shortly, and if there are questions that you guys have as we move on to the second question or different things, we'll let you guys go that way. So I'll introduce our panel. I'm moderating. I'm Tim Finnerty. I'm a shareholder at Clayton McCurvey. We're focused on industrial automation companies, manufacturing companies, and engineering companies. So this Integrate Conference is good for us. Our focus is trying to help be the trusted advisors for our clients and others. So I brought together a panel of experts that can help us with understanding the future of work, right? So now that we're in this new era, what does that mean? So to my right here, we have Joe Bamberger, the managing partner from Emerge Consulting. Joe can, when he introduces himself, he can give a little bit more about. We have Stephanie Murphy from Avisa, and then also from Clayton McCurvey, we have Brian Prozek, a senior manager. So Joe, why don't you introduce yourself and kind of give a little background on what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. As Tim mentioned, my name is Joe Bamberger, and I'm the managing partner of Emerge Consulting. At Emerge, we focus on helping businesses create long-term workforce development strategies, specifically by helping them attract, develop, and retain emerging talent. So we focus primarily on helping them create relationships with educational communities to recruit students out of high schools, community colleges, and universities.
And we also use Joe as a resource to help us with our campus recruiting, our experience recruiting, and other things as well. Next, we have Stephanie.
Hi there, Stephanie Murphy. I work with an organization called Advisa. At Advisa, we know that organizations want to be employer of choices, but they are struggling right now with the Great Resignation. They are struggling with talent, leaving managers feeling overwhelmed and staff feeling stressed. So we help design, deploy, and ultimately diagnose organizational dysfunction and helping organizations become stronger places to work and more attractive places to work.
We also have used Stephanie to help our organization try to figure out this new hybrid workplace. We're going through that right now as a consultant. I use her as a coach as well to help me understand how to better communicate with my staff or with others within our organization. So she's a great resource, and hopefully we'll have some good information. And now Brian.
Brian Prozek, Senior Manager at Clayton McCurvey. I work in our industrial automation practice. Work closely with Tim on a lot of stuff, and thanks, Tim, for letting me out of the office today. I promise I'll go right back to work after this. So we work with a lot of automation companies, system integrators, distributors, manufacturers of robotics, sensors, things like that, to help grow their business and get to where they want to see their business when they eventually retire and sell.
Great. All right, so when we're thinking about the future of work, right, one of the big things, and I'll start this off with Stephanie and then we can go, but how does building a culture in a hybrid work different than in the traditional or in-person environment?
Yeah, I think anybody here who's been experiencing the hybrid work culture or the remote work culture can say it's a lot more difficult because we don't have those organic interactions that are happening anymore when we were in the workplace. There's Neil Miller from the Digital Workplace. He talks about the difference between forest cultures and garden cultures, and I think in the past, when we have these physical workplaces where everyone's interacting with, just by nature of being there, giving space and interacting and kind of pollinating with each other, our cultures grow. And we have to be a lot more intentional about how we approach culture now, and it is more of this garden type of culture. We have to think about how people interact, what they need, how do we create intentional spaces. And so it does require a whole new thinking, and it's actually very system level thinking too. It's not just about, oh, we want to do great things with culture, so let's have more all team meetings anymore. We really have to think about how we coach, how we engage, and how we make people feel like they are contributing and they are noticed and connected in the workplace.
Joe, how do you, when you're out there on campus recruiting or different things and trying to do or talk with the new people coming in, what do you see? How do you explain this new culture?
Yeah, when you look at Gen Z, which is the high school and college students right now, right? They tend to be a lot more focused on learning development opportunities than any previous generation. And so the questions they're asking, the things they're focused on are, in a hybrid environment or in a virtual environment, what resources are there for me to learn, develop, get exposed to a variety of different work. And so what we focus on is explaining to them the type of experiences, the internal staff they're going to work with, the external clients that they're going to get engaged with, what sort of organized and planned training and development programs there are. That's their motivation, is continuously learning and growing. And so that's what we focus on from a culture standpoint for that generation.
And Brian, any thoughts? Now you get to report up and down, so you see both generations. What do you take from this new?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, as Stephanie kind of alluded to, that for so many years we built this culture because you saw the people every day, you worked with them, you picked up habits from people. Well, now the only person I see every day is my wife when I come out of my home office, and so if I want to try and teach one of our newer staff or show our newer members of our staff how something gets done, I have to make a conscious decision to say, hey, let's meet in the office on Tuesday so we can sit down and go through this problem. Or even let's just meet in the office. That's one of the things I've changed about my routine was the days I go into the office now, I try to leave my to-do list open because I never know who's going to be in the office, what conversation I might get into. And so it's making me change how I'm working. And so now it's even more challenging because the group that Joe's talking about, they're coming into an environment that we're all going through in the first time as well. So there's no one they can look to. So you're trying to help them kind of guide their way through the process as well. So it's, Stephanie used the word intentionality, and that's really a lot of what I'm seeing is that within our firm, within our clients, people are just being very, very intentional about the things they do and the way they do it.
Great. So any of you guys can take this one. The next question I have is, kind of feeding on that a little bit. How can technology be leveraged to impact the team and lead effectiveness?
I can jump in really quick. I think there's a lot of research and data out there that shows that technology-driven leaders win. They're actually 2 times more effective in creating and maintaining stress levels. They're also 5 times more effective in actually creating connected cultures. I think technology is also a critical part when we talk about leadership development and all of these things because Bill Gates has a quote and he says that we often overestimate the change that's going to happen in 2 years, but we underestimate the change that's going to happen in 10 years. And I think right now we are underestimating what this hybrid environment is going to do to our leadership workforce and leadership readiness within the next 10 years. If I don't see Brian leading on a regular basis and we're not creating intentional connection cultures, our leaders are not going to be ready. So right now we have this frontline skill gap, and we're going to continue to see that grow, and it's going to widen as we get into leadership skill gap within the next 8 to 10 years from here. So technology is really a critical piece to help us make those connections, and there's so many cool technologies out there. We have a lot of clients that use certain ones for engagement, certain ones to better understand who's in my staff. If you have a global staff and trying to understand what kind of skills do they have, because we don't get that the same way anymore. Because if I've hired somebody who's been working remotely, I don't always understand it, or I'm not always hearing about their background and their skill and their interactions. And in fact, I mean, I've been working with Clayton McCurvey for the last decade now, and there are some new individuals who have come on who I've only worked with remotely. And if I'm not intentional enough about it, I miss the fact that this person walked onto a rowing team, or that they have these connections in different ways. And those are things that become really critical. So I think where we can use technology in leadership development, we're going to see more engagement, we're going to see more connection, and people feeling like they're very connected. So.
Yeah, I think to add on to that too, right? Completely agree, right? Technology is going to differentiate you from your competitors and your peers, but remembering that technology is a tool in your toolbox, right? It's not meant to replace everything that you do, right? It's meant to make things easier or more efficient. And when you look at, and talking about college students specifically, right? They've gone through the past couple of years learning virtually, and as a result, they are burnt out from being in an entire virtual environment, right? If you think about even yourselves, and if you have to sit through one more Zoom conference or one more Zoom call, right? You need to kind of diversify the ways in which you're engaging and which you're teaching your staff, and relying exclusively on technology tools. As Stephanie was talking about, right? You kind of lose the connection, the bonding that you might have had at face-to-face, and so creating some variety within that, and remembering that they are tools in your toolbox and not fix-all solutions.
And it can't be one way. I think that's it. There can't be one way communications, because I think that's where we miss out.
Yeah. And Joe, isn't that really another way to kind of engage some of those younger, digital natives who, they live their lives in their phones, right? Mm-hmm. So rather than me trying to dictate to the staff the technologies we should use and the ways we should use them, that gives you another way of engaging them to help figure this out, because they're going to be more adept at it probably anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone likes to communicate in their own way, right? Some people are better at text, some people are better at phone calls, some people prefer video, some people never turn their cameras on, right? Everyone has different personalities and backgrounds that's going to suit best for their personality. And so understanding that, learning that, and utilizing that to help you with those connections is definitely beneficial.
From your guys' standpoint, what is one technology that you really like? Not Zoom or something like that, and what's one that you want to kind of get rid of, or think people are using it too much, if there is something like that. I'll start with Brian, since he's kind of the tech guy down there.
I guess technology I really like isn't exciting, but from a professional standpoint, OneNote has really been big for me. I mean, pulls together a lot of the functionality of different applications that Microsoft has, and in our environment, especially being remote now, to be able to share a OneNote with you and you can see real time what I'm doing, that has been really helpful. One I'd like to get rid of, I don't know that I'd want to get rid of it, but I'd like to limit the reliance on it, is, especially as things start to open back up, are the Zooms and the Teams and the videos. I mean, it's so easy to say, oh, let's just jump on a call here versus, hey, let's meet in the office. I know it's going to take each of us a commute and all those things, but understanding, and Stephanie, you talk about this, is understanding the right medium. Is this a conversation we need to have face-to-face? Is this a conversation that's best handled over Zoom? And weighing the pros and cons of each. So I wouldn't get rid of it altogether, but I do miss the face-to-face interaction.
Yeah. So there's a couple technologies that I really like. One is Predictive Index, which is a tool that helps us understand workplace motivation and how we make connections. So that is a tool that does help us, especially in the remote environment, get closer and more connected to how people want to work. So I think that that's really a tool. But another that has come about is a tool called 15.5. And it's an app-based tool that allows you to create engagement conversations and prompts engagement conversations. But it goes beyond just like the overall check-in. It will prompt you with some deeper conversation levels, and I think that's fantastic. If I could get rid of email, I would get rid of email. Just the amount and the way that we use email and the way that we kind of bog down our conversations, that would be one. And I think that a lot of conversations that should be done face-to-face or in real time are left to email, and the interpretation just gets lost, and we tend to lose people because they misjudge our intentions. And so we always say that we judge others by their behaviors, we judge ourselves by our intentions, and when our intentions don't match up with somebody else's belief of behaviors, we can have this huge disconnect and miscommunication. So.
For me, honestly, it's tools that make my life easier. So, right, obviously in the recruiting space, anything that can automate the process for me, right, that can, send, feeler emails or thank you for applying emails, or I'm a big fan of the Calendly or any of the CRM things that, students can schedule time on, to meet with you directly on your calendar, right? Anything that stops the back and forth of the unnecessary emails, right, I'm obviously a big fan. And when you look at the HR space in general, there's a ton of technologies that help automate the engagement process for you. Whether you're looking for an applicant tracking system, CRM type style software, or video interviewing, both one-way or two-way video interviews. There's a ton of tools out there that make the process easier to make sure that your hiring process is streamlined, efficient, and the candidates have positive experiences. So for me, those types of tools are things that free up my time to focus on the more important tasks rather than sending 1,000 emails every day. So I would agree with Stephanie that unnecessary emails, especially ones that you're copied on just for your information, tend to be a big waste of my time having to go through every day and be like, all right, I'm in the loop, but did I really need 6 emails back and forth on this along the way?
I would agree with the email sentiment. I think there's just so much of it. But Brian mentioned Teams sometimes too much. But what I like about Teams now is kind of that same thing on like with the OneNote. Is within Teams you can put documents in there and kind of group it into certain things. So if you're working on a assignment with a certain group of people, everything's right there rather than having to go back and search for it in email, right? I mean, so I think some of those things of making it more effective and efficient, that's helpful. Before I go on to the next question, any questions in the audience? Does anyone have anything that they want to ask or different things?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My question resides around everybody's commenting on email and the use of email. What are your thoughts of actual providing training to your employees on the proper use of email? I mean, I know for sure that when I started many years ago, there was no training on email. So you get a lot of people that send shotgun emails and they just don't understand the proper usage of emails. So I was just interested in your input on the actual purpose of training on actual use of email.
So just something I hear a lot from clients everywhere is they wish that their entry-level staff had email etiquette and were taught that at the college level, right? Hitting reply all when you don't need to hit a reply all, or using complete sentences, or addressing or closing things out the right way. I think that's a skill that is never taught. I don't know many companies that put any investment into teaching that email etiquette, but I know tons of companies that complain about it every day, especially when you have the youth coming into your organization and they're used to quick text messages or DMs through chats and things like that, right? They're not used to the formality of a traditional email, and I think that would be an excellent thing to train on based on the amount of complaints I hear about it.
Yeah. I was actually going to defer my answer to Stephanie because I know we've talked about this in the past, but that kind of goes back to the intentionality of, I mean, we never thought about that, or even like meetings, like having kind of ground rules for meetings and what are we going to do in meetings, et cetera. And you guys talk a lot about that of really having conversations around that, of what's appropriate for an email versus maybe a text versus a Teams. So
yeah, and
set that up and hand it off to
well,
you.
thanks. I so appreciate it. I do think there is the how we use email, and then there's the when and why that comes into it. And so I do actually think that it's very company specific, because I do have organizations that, you have leaders who still want to be copied on every single thing if we're micromanaging and they've got that culture. And so there's a different thing kind of that comes into that email conversation that even goes beyond. So I don't think that there's a hard and fast rule, but I do think there's a benefit of re-establishing what it looks like to have email, to utilize it. And as Brian mentioned, we're taking this even so far as to look at meetings. And we've never in the past really thought about what's the goal of the meeting and what's the role of the participants. And if we start to ask that question about like, what are the roles and goals of this email, you might have different answers as to why I might include somebody or not. Because sometimes I think, I just need to inform this person. But the reality is, do they need to be involved? And I think we can teach people a little bit better if we ask them, what's my role? Thanks for sending this email. What would you like me to do with this? Oh, this is just an FYI. Thanks, considered me informed. You can drop me off the list. And what we just start to do is teach people how to interact with us more effectively. But it is going to take some skill, and I think that it's a little more custom than saying, here's the blanket thing, other than some of the email etiquette that we have.
Looking from staff, from the bottom up, a lot of younger staff feel that they have to include everyone on emails as a kind of a CYA in the process, right? If they didn't include someone, right, it's kind of proving that I did this and I did it the way you asked. And right or wrong, a lot of that staff feels that it is a micromanagement type thing, that they need to do that.
There's a technology piece to that too, because especially if you are in a large organization, so anybody in here, 1,000 person or more organization, right? So you start to have large organizations and you're bringing in remote people, they don't know who to go to. So my sister just started working with Amazon, an amazing company, but she's working and she has to send like 6 or 7 emails to various people to try to figure out who's got the answer to certain things. And so it becomes really challenging for her to be efficient and effective. So some of those technologies that help us understand who the right person is and who the right contacts are become really critical, because we don't have that anymore, and we don't have that drive-by to say, Brian, who should I ask for this, right? You're just sitting in your office by yourself looking at a directory and saying, I hope it's you, right? And so I think there's a lot of cultural pieces to that as well.
Great. Any other questions before we get back to? All right. So I guess getting back to a little bit of the technology, when we're thinking about this, how should team members, new or long-term, find out how they are doing and how to grow? Like with this new hybrid workforce, what are you seeing, or how do you feel like what people should be doing?
I'll jump on that just because you're looking right at me, Tim. So I think gone are the days of the twice a year or once a year performance reviews. So if that's something that your organization is using, I would say it's an archaic way to go through and keep people connected to the work that they need to do. Moving into more agile coaching, where you are meeting on, I would say, a weekly, if possible, but at worst case scenario, a bi-weekly basis around 90-day goals is going to be much more effective for you as far as, and utilizing the technology to help support those things. Otherwise, things are changing too quickly. I mean, especially in this world, in the automation world, new technologies, new ideas, all of these things are happening, and we have to find ways to make sure that people feel connected to the big picture. So certainly agile coaching is a big part of it, and utilizing the tools and technology that you have at your fingertips, whether that is, I mean, just auto-scheduling sometimes is a great thing to do. Let's just set that up. We don't have to think about it, because it's much easier to change an appointment that's on your calendar than it is to find time on your calendar at a later date. So creating that and being more connected is certainly a space that we're going to need people to be thinking about as far as growth goes.
Yeah, kind of two other points on that I see a lot is, one is separating those conversations from compensation reviews.
Yes.
Right? If you're putting them together, right, you're not going to create any environment for growth, because the employee is going to be focused on making themselves sound as good as possible so they get the pay increase they're looking for. And the manager could potentially be in a position where they are looking to put them down in order to justify not providing them the pay increase they're looking for. And so separating those two processes, performance review and coaching from compensation review is kind of key, because then you create an environment where you can be open, honest, transparent about how you're doing, what you're doing well, what you need to improve on, and then actually using it as a coaching session for how to improve. And then the second thing that kind of leads into that transparency piece is creating key performance indicators or ways for me to see how I'm doing without those conversations. Right? You might have to get creative in some of the roles on being able to track that data and that information, but I promise you there's something in every role that you can track, so that way someone knows how they're doing before they walk into that meeting. Those types of conversations should never come as a surprise. You should be able to look at the data and know how you're performing in your role for the most part. And with the technologies we have now, so much of that can be automated for within real time to see kind of how I'm doing.
Yeah, and we, over the last couple of years with Stephanie's help, we kind of adjusted our process to be more like that. We call it real-time coaching, but essentially we went from, you'd wait 3 months to give somebody feedback, and then in that time they've prepared how many tax returns with the same issue, to, on a more frequent basis, sitting down and kind of building off what Joe says, we identified like 4 critical areas. Hey, these are the 4 things you really need to be doing well to succeed at your level. Okay, how did you do against those? Not a 1 to 10 scale, but are you meeting it, not meeting it? And then you can focus the conversation in on that. And as we've shifted more virtual, one of the things I've tried to do with my staff is even break down, rather than giving them a whole assignment and say, hey, do this whole project you've never done before, let's start with step 1. And I want you to go through step 1, get to this point, and then stop, and let's check back in. It may seem a little counterintuitive, because now I'm checking in with that person more frequently, but by the time they get done with step 1, I can fix any errors before they go into step 2, rather than getting through step 10 and saying, well, you screwed up in step 1 and everything since then is wrong. So that's been helpful for me, especially because I'm not in a situation where my staff can just walk 10 feet and ask me a question, then go back to work. I may be on another Zoom call or doing something else, and I think there's a little bit of hesitation. Even though it's all they have to do is click, dial. It's not as easy as walking up to somebody's desk. So.
And I think that's something that resonates with candidates specifically on campuses, is they're worried about making mistakes.
Yeah.
Right. And I think if you create an environment where it's okay to make mistakes, it's just not okay to continue to make that same mistake over and over. Right. Make a mistake, meet with your team leads or your managers, learn from it, so that way you can go on and make the next more challenging mistake. Yep. And then you learn from that one and you go on and make the next more challenging mistake, right? That freedom to make mistakes, that freedom to be wrong, without the fear of repercussions, right? Where it's viewed as all right, this is a learning opportunity, is the environment you want to set.
Okay, I think we have a question out in the audience.
No? Oh, there it is. A little delay. So are you using project software with your employees to keep track of these goals, or what kind of software are you using?
So we use a software called PerformYard that has goal setting, performance planning, like all that's kind of built in. Well, and that's for more of our like staff and senior level. They all use that software, but then, I mean, we're all in it, so if, you know, if somebody works with Tim more on a job, he'll probably schedule the review with Tim versus me, even though I may oversee their overall performance plan. But then we try to, within there we can set goals and tie, you know, real-time coaching sessions back into their goals and say, hey, you know, based upon what you were trying to accomplish here, this is something you should focus on for the next, you know, month or whatever it might be. Perform Yard? Perform Yard. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. You guys probably know more softwares than I do.
For us, it's a little easier, right? An applicant tracking system or a CRM, right, tracks those communication data points really easy. So it's a lot easier in a sales or a recruiting space than it might be in a service-based industry.
I do think that there's a lot of HRIS systems, human resource information systems, that are out there that many of your companies are probably already utilizing. We just typically don't expand those beyond the hiring space very often. And I think to Joe's point earlier, getting a lot more clarity around not just what needs to be done, but how people need to go about doing it. Because we can come to solutions, we can get to answers, but if people aren't doing it the way that we want to, the tax return is prepared, but if we haven't gotten it in the right time, we haven't done the right communication with the clients and all of those things, there are still things to correct. A little earlier, I was over and just kind of popped into a conversation, and they were talking about a concept that I had never heard before. If somebody knows it, please tell me. But it was this idea of automation with a human touch. Does anybody remember what they called it? Started with a J, I couldn't remember, but it's really interesting because what they did is they were talking about this idea that when something goes wrong in automation, it changes the way that we approach it. We actually stop the system, everybody comes together and does root cause analysis right in the moment. And that's what we're really talking about. We can apply that same concept into this idea of agile coaching. Because a lot of times we wait till things go, we've created and manufactured multiple parts with this defect, and then we don't realize it until later or until the end of the shift. Same thing happens with coaching. So if we can find ourselves in a space like Brian's talking about, breaking down some of those things, capturing it in real time, we're not going to keep repeating those mistakes, and they're not going to keep building on each other. So certainly there's lots of opportunities there. But.
So an interesting, you know, you guys both talking about, you know, being able to make mistakes and different things like that. But, you know, in this new world of hybrid work, you know, and basically, you know, onboarding people differently and spending time with them differently, you know, how do you know, you talk about the agileness of getting it and stopping it, but part of this is how do you manage to that so that you just don't let them go on and on and on and make the mistakes because you're not checking in because you got other stuff going on. So, you know, what have you seen as successes for onboarding new employees?
Yeah, I can jump in. So something we see a lot of is, you know, providing additional resources than you might otherwise, right? You're going to do that initial onboarding, that initial training, you know, everything that you've historically always done as a company, but providing resources for your new hires or candidates to be able to go back and research. So learning management systems are becoming very popular right now, where maybe your training is recorded or automated online in some way. So you've gone through the training maybe face-to-face or virtually, you know, via video, but then having a resource that your new hires can go back to for reference, right? Onboarding tends to be a lot of drinking, you know, through a fire hose, right? It's more information than you could ever possibly retain in one sitting, and so having resources that I can then go back to and reference as I'm starting that work is incredibly valuable.
I'm definitely seeing an uptick, and we're encouraging a lot of our clients to look at mentorship for the onboarding space. I mentioned earlier about the Predictive Index, and one of the things that has changed, and when we use that technology, is we actually match people up based on their learning styles. So if we can understand those things, you know, if I'm a person who's just big picture, tell me where you want me to go and set me free, I often tell people I'm like an arrow, just like give me the general direction, right? You don't have to give me all of the other information. And so if I'm that person and I'm working with somebody who is very linear and step by step, and I'm the one who's training them, coaching them, I'm going to make them absolutely crazy, because I'm thinking out here and they're still wondering, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do in step one? So where we can find ways and match people in mentorship and having that resource. So even when they do go through the online, because we're seeing a huge uptick in the LMS, that again, learning management system, but even when they do go through that, I can go back to Joe as my mentor and say, hey Joe, like there was this one thing that I just didn't really understand. Can you help me understand that a little bit better? And he's gonna bring it in a language and speak to me in a way that actually does support the way I interact.
We see that even, below the mentor level. I mean, Clayton McCurvey does a great job with their buddy program, right? Having someone that's new to the company as well, maybe been there 2 years or less, that you can kind of say, like, I don't feel bad about going to them with a stupid question, right? Because it's not a manager, it's not a boss, it's not a mentor, right? It's someone that's more or less at the same level of me that can kind of help guide me through those maybe embarrassing to ask questions.
Yeah. I do have just speaking to that, I have a client that has a shepherd, they have a shepherd, so they will give somebody, so the idea that like the mentor maybe has already been there, but the shepherd walks alongside you. So I think that that's really cool too, because it doesn't have to be somebody in leadership, so certainly tapping into that. The cool thing about technology is that you can actually leverage a lot more people in your organization to onboard than you ever could before. So think about like, what are the different layers and how we can bring people to.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part. Talking with, and prior to coming to Clayton McCurvey, I worked in engineering, so I've seen this on both sides. And I think regardless of what industry you're in, there's this assumption that if I'm coming in, I'm supposed to know how to do this job. Right. And so that's where, as Joe mentioned, creating this environment where people are comfortable failing. And you mentioned in the response to the one question of, it's going to look different for every company. In Clayton McCurvey, it looks different at every level. The support we give a new staff person versus a 5-year person is completely different. We try to tailor it to what they're doing. And I can't believe in my engineering career, we onboarded and developed and grew people without a tool like Predictive Index, because it's the old adage of if your only tool is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. Right. My assumption for every person who unfortunately had to work with me when I was in engineering was, you're going to do the job the same way I do. Right. And if you're not doing it, then you're not doing it right. And so the Predictive Index kind of helps me pull back and say, okay, even though this might be the way I would grow and develop, I need to give this person more of this and adjust my style to what they need, which ultimately will help them advance faster.
I know one thing, what you guys are talking about as well, like, this tailored approach is really an important thing, I think. I think that's one thing that's come out of this hybrid environment, right? Understanding that everybody is a little bit different and that you really do need to tailor it. And we've been talking internally a little bit about nano trainings, right? Basically these onboarding processes, you sit through 8 hours of, here it is and there it is, but basically videoing those things and basically making them little nano, 15 minutes long, so you can digest it or go back to it when you need that information, right? And not everybody does it that way, but some people like it that way. As Stephanie said, I'm a big pictured person. I hate like sitting through 8 hours or something, but if I do a 15-minute, nano training, I can pick up on that and then figure out how to help my clients or help train and develop someone else. So I think, when we look at, we talk about hybrid and all this and the pros and cons, I think as we continue down this road, we'll see that there's a lot of pros that are going to come out of this. It's just how do you implement them correctly? And maybe the biggest one will be we'll get rid of email. So. We got it. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for your time today. The question I had kind of shifts gears to networking and team building events. Wondering what you're seeing in that field. I know in terms of events and stuff that we've done, it's been pretty much a mixed bag of results and responses. Have you seen anything that's worked well and anything that hasn't worked well?
I think, the real challenge there, at least from what I've seen, is that for maybe the more introverted side of the office they would go to the Christmas party or the holiday party or whatever you want to say, kind of out of obligation. Like now they almost have a built-in out, right? That I don't have to leave my house, I can just say I was busy or whatever. So it really, to me, and what I've heard some of my clients do, I have one client that is out in Phoenix, who has talked about once his leases are up, drastically shrinking his footprint, and then having once a trimester, once a quarter, whatever it is, fly-ins, where he gets the whole company together and you'll do some big, planning meetings and social events and things like that to try and encourage that. I think the typical accounting answer, it depends it depends on the size of the organization, it depends on the people you're working with, but really finding what's important to them, because for one member of my staff, it might just be a face-to-face lunch once a month. But then for another group of our staff, they're going to want to have the happy hour on Friday and get 20 people together and do it all. So it requires more, but to me, this whole debate on hybrid, remote, whatever, is kind of the tip of a larger problem of the shrinking, and Joe, you can speak to this, the shrinking pool of workers. And so you're going to have to get really creative to attract and retain those people, because everybody else is competing for the same ever-shrinking pool. And so hybrid's just going to be one element to deal with. But
yeah, I mean, to Brian's point, right, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer, right? And I think something that most companies forget to do or don't give enough credence to is asking employees what they want from an engagement perspective, right? Some might want those one-on-one lunches, some might want the happy hours, right? And being flexible enough as an organization to cater to all your audiences, right? You don't want to only focus on the majority or only focus on the minority, right? You want to focus on everyone and engaging people in a way that they want to be engaged. Some people, the introverts, right, if we're playing stereotypes, right, might not want to get together in group situations, and maybe they want an additional perk or benefit that speaks to them specifically. And so kind of catering your engagement level based on what individuals are looking for.
I think the big word that a lot of people use right now is intentional, right? Be intentional with what you're doing, right? And really trying to understand your team or who you're doing it for, because I think it makes a lot of sense.
Last thing I would probably add is think about micro team building as opposed to these very large things, because what happens is when you can put together smaller groups and you do orchestrate a little bit, give them some structure around things that they work on or things that they interact with, questions or those kind of things. If I've spent 2-3 quarters interacting with this small group of people, and I now have the opportunity to see them face to face, it's much more likely that I'm going to show up because I do feel like I have that connection. I think we are disconnected in the remote workspace, and so if we do feel that, it could be 50-50. Like I might show up and it might be okay, but if I can create those smaller connection pods, that could be very, very helpful inside of your teams as well. For example, in my organization, we do TLC pods, and we do not talk about work at all. They are around different things, and so my current pod that I've been working with, we all had to learn something new outside of like our skill set, and so we decided that we were going to learn about like the history of Sesame Street, and so it was just kind of a funny, odd thing, but we're bringing that and like what we're learning about that into just like how does this reflect in our lives and do things like that. So there's different things that you can do, but I would say start and try with the micro connections, because many of you have probably seen that your organizations look very different. And if you've hired a lot of remote employees, they just haven't had those. So start there, and then the larger ones will be better attended.
I mean, I think one other thing related to a lot of that is we were just talking about this earlier today about, what activities do people like, right? What do they like to do? The same thing, introverts, they like to go coffee shop. It's really trying to get more information, grab as much data as we possibly can from what everybody is doing, and then trying to put it into something that then spits out, oh yeah, we could do this or we could do that. And as Stephanie's saying, use the information that we have to be better and use the technology, to help us with this. We're all still learning, but I think it's coming around. We got just about a minute left. Any final thoughts from the? Oh, we got one. Oh, we got a question. Go.
Good afternoon. So my question was, as industries are going back into work, how do you make sure that the technology and the face-to-face meetings are kind of divided, where technology isn't a distraction from those face-to-face interactions?
So we actually did this with Clayton McCurvey and really sat down and talked about what are we trying to accomplish in for certain meetings, certain connections, and what's the best format for that. You know, when you think about, there's different reasons that we meet. I mean, one is for information, just straight information. A lot of times those things can be delivered in a virtual format, a digital format. We don't necessarily need to be face-to-face for those. But things like innovation, where I need creativity and ideas and those spur from each other, being in a room or in space together, those just tend to work better. We also have better retention when we're in a 360-degree space. So even though there are a lot of great tools that can bring us together, we can't go back to that moment where we say, oh yeah, I remember in that back corner we had this. Do you remember we drew with that red marker? Those things can actually trigger more retention. So even when we think about adult learning and how we, in the learning styles that we go about, I would really think about what do we need to accomplish and how will people be able to interact best with that.
Any final thoughts?
We're at our time.
I know,
so.
but I meant with Brian or Joe.
There was one other quick question if we.
I just wanted to say that I was in HR eons ago, and so it's always interesting to be reminded of a lot of these thoughts. We're in a manufacturing environment, though. We have press operators and things like that. And I do find that a lot of these conversations are around service economy. Yes. And it would be really helpful to hear ideas for retention and ability to attract people to a shop floor. I mean, we have Cleveland, we participate in National Manufacturing Day, we try to get middle schoolers interested, but actually just bringing those people in is very difficult in today's world.
And I think, you know, from my clients who have a similar situation where, you know, maybe they've got a panel shop or a build shop, so half of the office can work from home and the other half has to come in, and now you get this bit of animosity, right? That, well, we're the ones always coming in, and these people have it so easy. And I wish I had a silver bullet, but I think the best thing is kind of where Stephanie Tar is having those conversations. And okay, we know you're going to have to be in, and I'm sure you guys are doing that, but we know you have to come in the office. So how do we make this, flexible for you in terms of hours or roles or assignments or things like that? But yeah, that is a very difficult, I'd probably say half of my client base are more pure service, and then it's really hard when there's a place people have to be, but asking those folks and getting their input is probably the most critical piece to try and find a way that, knowing that you need to be in here, how can we make this as enjoyable and as beneficial as possible for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think a final thought there is, as Brian was saying, again, and we talked about it earlier, is asking, right? I mean, trying to get a better understanding of what is it that everyone wants, and then is there a way to make it might be different for each person, but is it capable? I was just down at a manufacturing plant in Kentucky of one of my clients, and they, their employees want to do like 3 12-hour shifts or different things like that. So, and then get a few days off, right? So they're moving different things around. They're excited about having more time at home and different things like that. Right? So I think that's.
I know we're at our time, so if anybody has to leave, but I just want to say this because I work with a lot of manufacturing shops, and when we're on the floor, leadership development is the most critical and the best investment that you can make if you want to retain and engage people. Your leaders, your managers, your frontline supervisors are the window by which your people see the organization. So it doesn't matter how good you are, it doesn't matter how great things you're doing out in the world, what the news is reporting about you. If I come in every single day and I work for a jerk, I'm not going to do it, right? And so we want people talking and bringing their friends. So I will tell you, hands down, it is one of the best things that you can do. And we've got a lot of research around frontline supervisor programs that actually will show the results with that.
Well, we appreciate you guys sticking around. Thank you, panelists, to Joe, Stephanie, Brian. Appreciate it.